Hey, everybody, it's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. It is great to be with you here. I have great news for the new year. And of course, Happy New Year to all of you. I have great big news for the new year. I indeed have started a new endeavor. VegTech Invest. You're probably saying, oh my gosh, but Elysabeth, you're doing Plant-Powered Consulting and the Plant-Based Business Hour. Thank you for subscribing. But there's been something that's been near and dear to my heart for almost a year now. And I've been working with my partner, Dr. Sasha Goodman, to bring this to reality. So VegTech Invest is something that we just launched this year. I want to bring on not just my business partner, Dr. Sasha Goodman, but I also want to bring on the advisors who've been helping us bring VegTech Invest to life and what VegTech Invest is up to right now. Let's bring on Dr. Sasha Goodman. Hey, happy to have you with me. Chris Buck, the founder of DEA Wealth, and Ken Kornbluh, managing partner of Kambio Partners. Thanks, everybody, for being with me.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
Great to be here.
Okay, so let's get into it. Breaking news, everybody. So Sasha Goodman and I have started VegTech Invest. VegTech Invest is the advisor to the new ETF on the New York Stock Exchange, which is the VegTech Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF. We are so deeply excited about this product, and we're here to talk to you about just how we got here. What would make us start a new ETF, how long it took us to get to market, how complicated it is actually to get to market. And then we'll end today's show on the secular trends where we believe plant-based innovation is going. 2022 is going to be a very exciting year. Before we get into any of the details, I want to tell everyone that investing involves risk. Principal loss is even possible. The fund's investment objectives, risk, charges, expenses must be considered carefully before investing. The prospectus and summary prospectus contain this and other important information about the investment company. And it may be obtained by visiting eatv.vegtechinvest.com. Read it carefully before investing. Oh my gosh, let's get into it. Sasha Goodman. So before we started this ETF, VegTech Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF, we were working together about 9 months ago and thinking that this maybe wasn't even going to happen. Maybe you can tell everybody how we started working together.
Sure. We were both involved in various plant-based groups online, including the Glasswall Syndicate, and we got to know each other, online through that. And it turned out you lived close by, so. Yes. I had dinner. We were at your place, nice wine, and we got talking about, how can we develop this even more, and so we were both, collecting at the time lists of plant-based stocks, and we didn't see, a fund out there or anything like that, but we were just going to put out our own list, and we did. And it got a great reaction, and we didn't see any public fund in the market that was doing it. So we just said we want to do it the right way. So we decided to make our own fund.
Yeah, it's been a really exciting time. So when I look back to last March, when you and I were just getting to know each other, as you say, over a glass of wine, and we thought, gosh, there are a lot of companies out there on the public markets. And it's interesting to see how the supply chain is building up to support plant-based innovation. And maybe we should put together a list that people could, look at so they'd have some options in the public markets, because you and I come from venture capital, but very few people can do venture capital. The smallest amount it would be to get in and support a company would be like $25,000. That's a lot of money for people. But in the public markets, you have more options. And so we've started putting together this list. And then we thought, well, we'll make the list public so that everybody can have this knowledge. And once we did that, people just were calling me at home. People were tracking me down saying, oh my gosh, what can I do with this? And I said, well, I just gave you the list. And they were like, no, please put together an ETF for me. Please help me invest. And so it's been 10 months of deep due diligence and lots of research and struggle since then.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the hardest part of putting together an ETF?
The financial industry is, for real, one of the most regulated industries in the world. And as a startup, there are a lot of policies and procedures you really have to think through and really get through and understand the implications of. So starting our own registered investment advisory has been an adventure. And there are a lot of details and a lot of big decisions that are involved. And it's taken a lot of commitment to get this done, and a lot of plant-based food also, I think,
Yes.
to help me not get kinks in my various muscles and stuff.
Yeah, I know you've had some really long nights. You come to this from a numbers background. You have your PhD from the Stanford School of Business, and you've spent your time there doing time series analysis. How have your years at Stanford really informed the work that you do on the fund, because you are indeed fund manager?
Well, in addition to just, the quantitative side and the numbers and having a fluency with that, I mean, just as a researcher, when I was doing research, I came across the importance of the food system and how, if you trace back, our food from where it came from, there are a lot of big implications. And so I was at an academic conference, and I was at an academic conference of all places, and it kind of got me into this idea of investing. And it got, because at the conference, the scientists and academics were already on board with this idea of plant-based food being really good for the planet and people's health. But they were kind of saying we were asking each other, how is this going to translate into a big system-wide shift? And what institution is going to save us? What institution is going to come up with regulations and this and that? And I thought, markets are a really good place for this to happen. You don't have to wait for the institution necessarily for people to be part of a upswelling of interest into basically voting with their fork and their wallet.
Yeah, no, I love that you say this, because usually governments are the last to get on board. This is one of the powers of business, is that business can funnel capital needed for innovation, and innovation is what drives jobs and what drives change. So, and ultimately in business, what we do is we take a problem and we solve it at a global scale. And that's really the purpose of business, I see. So, and that's part of the secular trend that we'll see in plant-based innovation. We'll talk about it a little later with Chris and Ken, just why there's no turning back at this point to a shift to a plant-based food system. And I think we all believe that wholeheartedly. I'll just ask a couple more questions about, starting the ETF. Was there any point when you thought, I'm not sure that this is going to come together?
Oh my God. Well, in the back of my mind, I have those thoughts because there's just a lot of uncertainty and risk involved in such a big venture, and a lot of hurdles, and just I would say frequently, although I tried not to, bring it up all the time, but there were a lot of moments, but I knew that this was in my heart a purposeful venture that kind of used my strengths, and I just calmly stuck to it.
Yeah, I will say that you have been a level-headed partner the whole way through. It sounds like, oh gosh, this must be an easy venture because we're talking about it so casually today. But once we both decided that the public had asked us to do this, and we started researching and looking into really the experts to guide us, just to give a shout out to all the people that we worked with, and also to shed some light on how complicated it is. We're thrilled to work with US Bank as our custodian, and we are thrilled to have compliance partners in Sipperman and Foreside. And we also have an extremely skilled and the best in the business sub-advisor with Pensera, and lead market maker of Citadel, and also authorized participant Citadel, and UBS just coming on board. And of course, we're thrilled to be with the New York Stock Exchange. What a complete honor. So that just gives you a sense for the structure around one product. And of course, we hope to have more products in the market. But for me, just as you say, Sasha, that you really felt this was putting your skill set to the best use possible. One of the reasons I was so dedicated to starting an ETF that's focused on plant-based innovation, and so companies that are innovating with plants and plant derivatives and producing animal-free products is because I wanted to give people who believe in this as much as we do the opportunity to invest and be a part of this secular trend. I wanted them to have this outlet, this voice for their dollars. Again, not everyone can get into venture. And I wanted to support and drive capital to those companies that are really actively innovating for the large shift that you're talking about. So it's really very exciting. And, it's fun to be, of course, driven by getting the shareholders of the ETF, as much value as is possible, but also being driven by change. And I do think this is where I want to hear from Ken and Chris. I do think in our lifetime, I'm not going to shout out anybody's age, but we're talking less than 40 years, let's say. I think in all of our lifetimes, I do think that we'll see a shift, and it's that secular trend that I'd like to talk about. So Chris, I'll throw it to you. You jumped on the VegTech bandwagon early on. What an honor for us that you would come to us as an advisor to help us navigate the ETF landscape. Before you were helping us and creating your own firm at DEA Wealth, you were with Robo Global. Now, Robo Global, for those who don't know, is one of the leaders in a thematic ETF. A thematic ETF is what VegTech is. So it's an ETF that focuses just on one theme and the companies in that theme. You had a long time experience with Robo Global and robotics, and you saw a secular trend there. So maybe you could talk about some of the similarities that you saw between the robotics secular trend and now what you're thinking the plant-based innovation secular trend could be.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate you including me on this journey. Sasha and Elysabeth and Ken have been great to work with. And I was fortunate enough to learn a lot at BlackRock, where I ran capital markets and looked over 300 or 400 different ETFs and had the opportunity, very similar story. A bunch of engineers were around, like, gosh, there's ubiquitous automation. The processing capability is a parabolic, exponential increase. There's declining cost curves, and there's going to be ubiquitous automation. And there are going to be companies that are focused on driving the fourth industrial revolution. So I became involved in the company, and the more I learned about it, the more it seemed like such a kind of simple but true no-brainer of an investment. The challenge is finding the experts who can capture that growth in an investable product or strategy. And so the affinity of what I learned from Robo Global, when I was introduced to Sasha and Elysabeth, I'm like, wow, this is very similar feel and sort and demand. And so I started diving deeper into the demand. And, there's a pretty nice article written by PricewaterhouseCoopers talking about global macro secular trends, from a shift to global economic power. Certainly the U.S. will not be the number one kid on the block forever. There's a demographic change. Many of us are getting older. You look at Japan, you look at the U.S. There's rapid urbanization. There's a rise of technology, of robotics, automation, ushering in the fourth industrial revolution. And then climate change and resource scarcity. And so the more I began to research this venture, and I started thinking about, how do we feed the world? And you look at the population, the United Nations, we're going from 7 billion, adding 83 million people a year. We're going to get into 2030, which is eight years away or so. We're going to have 8.6 billion people. How do we feed that many people without killing the world? And it's actually a pretty big challenge. Fortunately, there's a lot of capital and a lot of venture capital and a lot of companies trying to solve that problem. And every angle that I came into, it felt very similar to robotics and automation, that there is going to be ubiquitous automation, and there is a need to change our diets and to possibly think about how do we feed the new population that's growing in Nigeria, the middle class in China. It was very clear to me that we can't feed the world under a Western diet like we eat in the US. And I look at diabetes as one example. Type 1 and type 2 diabetes, part of it is age, part of it is our diet here in the United States. It's a big, big problem. And healthcare cost is another pretty big trend from diet. It's 20% of GDP, and it's typically the most expensive cost of GDP. So I look at all these secular trends, and it's pretty easy to identify the problem. Then you try to find the solution, and then you try to find, are there companies that are public that are actually with high revenue, high technology, that are innovative, that are focused and dedicated. And what I found through robotics is you really need to find a team of experts from industry, that knows industry, that can read the tea leaves, if you will, what direction it's really going. And the more I looked at VegTech and climate and some of the growth opportunities, the more and more and more excited I got about it. And I love what you said, Elysabeth and Sasha, about driving capital. I think the ETF, beyond just being a kind of an opportunity for some people to think about investing, it's really helping drive capital in a really efficient way, and it's democratized investing for people who want to make a change in the world. So I love what you're doing. I'm glad to be aboard. It's exciting.
It is an exciting time. I want to pick up on some of the things that you said. So you have two different things going on there. You have the rise in healthcare costs because our current diet is fostering things like diabetes, but also colorectal cancer and heart disease. These are the main killers, much more so than something like terrorism or something. We think of these huge, massive attacks coming our way, but actually it's much more the health of our care system and how we feed ourselves. That's really attacking us from within, if you will. And those costs just skyrocketing. But then you talked about the scarcity of resources. So I think it was on Vice that, and I know that animal agriculture, our traditional way of feeding ourselves, is very land and water intensive. But on Vice, they were saying that in 15 years, 40% of the world won't have access to clean water. So when you talk about, the growing middle class in Africa, China, and then India also, I'll say, it's going to be very difficult to feed these growing populations when the population's growing, but we're not getting more land and we're not getting more water. So we're going to have to make more with less. How do you do that? You really need to revamp the food supply system if you're going to get higher quality food at larger quantities for less resources. Ken, I want to bring you in because you're also a believer in the secular trend, and you also have experience in other secular trends like clean energy, electric vehicles, and semiconductors. So I wonder if you could share, also thank you for being an advisor to VegTech and to the VegTech Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on secular trend and if you see any similarities between the rise in semiconductors, electric energy, and clean energy and electric vehicles.
Well, as an investor, it's a very comfortable and lucrative thing to follow secular trends and invest in companies that are engaged in an industry where there's a secular trend going on. And the reason for that is there's two things that are happening in those kinds of industries. The first thing is they're usually growing very rapidly, just like the plant-based food industry is. And the other thing that's happening as well is there's already a large industry in most cases, not all, but most. But when there are large industries already, it's very easy to see that the new practices, the new technologies, the new ways of doing things replace the older ways. And it's a very clear path to seeing that. As an investor, that means that you can invest with some degree of comfort in that the companies have a big market opportunity. So I'm a big believer in following secular trends and have done well with that.
So I want to riff off of what Ken's saying. If you think about the horse and buggy, a very inefficient way to move around. We invented the car. We now only use cars. If you think about the computer, Sorry. If you think about the typewriter, There isn't one thing that would make me invest in a typewriter today. There's not one invention. There's nowhere to go with that. That has lived out its course. Now I use something called a cell phone, and I also use something called a computer. So when you look at how we've shifted in different areas, how quickly that replacement can take place. So I know food is near and dear to people's hearts, and they say, oh, well, but I was growing up and my grandmother made me X and Y. But actually, when people get on board, and I do think they'll get on board with things like cultivated meat, where you're not even asking people to give up meat. It is the exact same meat, but less resource intensive. I think you're going to see really quick adoption, just like we did with cell phones. I mean, 15 years ago, let me think about that. Well, let's say 20 years ago, my cell phone was like an extra bag. Like it was, it was like heavy, and I'd be like, wait, I got to bring my cell phone. It's super heavy, and now you think about how it's, for millennials, I think they're going to insert it into their wrist at any time soon. So there can be very quick adoption, I guess is my point. But since Ken brought up investing, I want to take this opportunity to read that investing involves risk. Principal loss is possible. The fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses must be considered carefully before investing. The prospectus and summary prospectus contain this and other important information about the investment company, and it may be obtained by visiting eatv.vegtechinvest.com. Read it carefully before investing. Ken was just talking about secular trends in general. He's not talking about investing in our fund per se. He's just talking about investing in general. But I just want everyone to know that no matter what you do, always get your hands on the prospectus, no matter what you're investing in. So very exciting times. I wonder, Sasha, if you have anything that you'd like to say about secular trends, because there are so many examples of how animals have been inefficient. And when we look, I'll just hop in and say, before I let you go, we look at how inefficient animals are. We talk about it a lot on this show. So you think, well, we've got trees. Trees pull carbon from the air, which is great because we've got climate change. So it'd be great to pull carbon from the air. Instead, we cut them down and grow grains. These grains have fiber, they have protein. Do we feed that food to people? No, we give that food to animals. And then those animals need time, land, water. They need more grains. We got to cut down more trees, give them more food. And then you're looking at a food conversion rate of about 7 calories of feed going to a chicken to produce 1 calorie of human food. And it's about 25 to 30 for cows. So these very inefficient exchange coming from animals. Are there any other examples that you think of about the inefficiency of our current system and how we can be better?
Well, it's inefficient, and there's increased demand as population size grows. Well. People just love protein, and the middle class is growing around the world, and they just want their protein. And the traditional way of getting that has been through converting, as you say, the animal feed, which is usually just grains and grasses and such, through this animal in this terribly inefficient way to produce a tasty, very pleasant, concentrated bit of protein with some fat. That's not going to stop. That's going to increase. What we got to do is, and what more people are realizing is, and flexitarians are realizing this, which is becoming a huge proportion of the globe, is that we got to cut down on meat and animal products. It's for various reasons. Health is the reason we can look to for our own self, but also just if you trace the food back to where it came from, the food system has a huge impact on the well-being of wildlife, livestock, and a very big impact on air, land, and water as well. When you go to the market, you just see that little market where you buy the groceries, or you have it delivered, or whatever. You go to the shop, but if you trace it back to where it came from, about 40% of all habitable land on Earth is just used for livestock production alone, and that's huge. And most of that land could be used to grow plant foods for humans more efficiently.
Right. So what you're saying is that you'd use less land and you'd use less water, but you'd get a more of a food output, and you'd get healthier food because, again, animal proteins are going to have saturated fat and just not the cholesterol and just not the healthiest option for you. So you're going to get sort of cleaner, if you will, protein, and then you're going to get it with less resources used. So just by way of comparison, life cycle analysis for Beyond Meat was comparing a Beyond Meat burger, which is plant-based burger, or an animal burger, and it's 99% less water, 93% less land, 90% less greenhouse gas emissions, and 40% less energy used. So you're talking about major savings and just more efficient. That's what we're talking about when we talk about a secular trend, really just being more efficient. I would like to say it's true that human health really is the driver, but a new study by Innova Market Research says that planetary health has just surpassed human health as an interest in driving flexitarians. Flexitarians being those people who are working out the meat and working in more vegetables. Maybe they're not 100% every day, but that's really their goal. I mean, most people at this point have heard from their doctor at some point, like, work out the red meat, work out the red meat. And now people are seeing that connection to the environment as well. So there's that strength in the secular trend, but I'll say it's not the only thing. So if you think about vegans and vegetarians, how strong and vocal they are, it's wonderful. If you think about people who are interested in their health, or millennials who are interested in the environment and they're using their dollars with their voice, it's wonderful. But then you also have to look at industry. Industry's there to make money. They were there for the bottom line. Inefficiency doesn't work for them. So inefficiency is a bad business equation. So you look at industry that's also looking to make more money by feeding more people on the planet, and they know that they don't have the resources to do it. So that's why you're seeing industry also innovate towards plant-based options. And really, it's the combination of these three things together. So the diehard ethical, the people interested in their health and the health of the planet, and the people who are interested in the bottom line, all three forces are working together. That's why it's a secular trend, in my opinion. If anybody wants to add anything, now's the time.
Well, I think that part of this trend is making foods that even taste sometimes better than what they're replacing. And you see that with some of the consumer taste tests of certain products out there. And I think that's an opportunity that we can create versions of the traditional foods that actually even taste better sometimes. And that'll drive the trend as well, because the retail market is largely driven by taste.
Yes, taste, price, and convenience drive the retail market. And I love that you say this, because ultimately you're talking about innovation. So we're back to why we have our ETF, VegTech, the Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF, is because ultimately this is about innovation. And like I was saying with the typewriter, there's nowhere to go with the typewriter. There's nothing you can do to make that product more attractive. Animal agriculture has reached the same thing. There's just, we've tried different feeds. We've tried sticking everyone in a factory and giving them no space or water or sun, we've just tried. We're done there. There's nowhere to go. But now with plants, it's just beginning. So you might get not only better output and higher quality, but you could get tastier items as well. So as you look to things like cultivated meat, which, can actually make meat from the cells of an animal without ever actually bothering the animal, there's a lot you can do to make that piece of meat, one, tastier, but also, who can afford filet mignon? But if you make it out of cells in a lab, everyone can afford filet mignon. So there's a lot of benefits that can come out of this innovation that currently we don't have in our food supply system.
And I might add one little thing about the adoption, the S-curve of innovation. It feels like your listeners and your industry, all of you understand, but most of society right now is just catching up. And I think in the very near term future, and we saw this with all the engineers and robotics and automation, it quickly was adopted by the industry people. And then slowly over the next 2 to 3 years, it really, really picked up momentum. And I feel like if some of your listeners are familiar with that S-curve, it's just really the adoption rate of innovation. And you would imagine it's early, then you get a tipping point, and then it goes parabolic. And I think it's really just the beginning of the beginning of this secular trend. So it's potentially very exciting from a return perspective, but also the more returns you get, probably the healthier and better the planet will be. So it's really kind of a neat win-win.
It is. And it's at this time when you have the empowered consumer, you know, if there's any benefit to COVID, and there really isn't much, but I'll say if there's any benefit to COVID, it's that people have taken back their own health. You know, they've really decided to stay in the kitchen, get back to cooking, educate themselves about what their body needs, what they want. And so this empowered consumer has really become vocal, and millennials in particular, they've got this skill set. So they've really put their dollars behind new innovation. And that's why, again, I'm so excited about our ETF, because for some people, this is very meaningful. So for Sasha and myself, for example, this is a very meaningful endeavor. And I'm just happy that opportunity is now out there for people.
I see it as a social movement in a way. It's a beginning. It's going to pick up momentum.
Yeah, and I'll also riff on what Chris was saying. I had an interview as kind of an off-the-record interview with someone from Cargill. So this is Cargill now, a meat producing company. They've changed their name from a meat company to a protein company. He said the reason that they had done that is because they know that the shift is going to happen, and it's going to happen very quickly. They're all on board for doing investment into research for new technologies, because they already know that the change is coming. The CEO of Cargill this June of 2021, said that he anticipates in 3 years, plant-based meat will be 10% of the meat market cannibalizing. So it won't be a yes and, but it'll be a cannibalization of meat products. That comes from the CEO of Cargill as of June of 2021. So, I mean, obviously we're all kind of saying the same thing, but it's a very, very exciting time, which is why our ETF is so meaningful to be a part of change. I think I'd like to leave people with that it's just thrilling to be a part of change. So as we wrap up today's meeting, because we did mention we have our wonderful partners at Foresight, and they're going to want to review this interview, so I'll keep it short for them. I want to hear from each of you. I'm going to start with Ken first. Ken, give me 3 things. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now? What is your favorite phrase if you're having a bad day? And what's your go-to snack?
Well, I'm going to start in reverse order to mess you up.
Okay.
So my favorite snack are nuts, and my favorite nut of nuts is our pistachios, hopefully salted and already out of the shell.
Okay. For easy gobbing, for like get it faster in my mouth. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love the complex flavors and the good umami-ness of them. What I wish I knew 10 years ago really was that the truth is you can have 2 portfolios of stocks, and they can have the same stocks in them, and one can have a negative return, the other one can have a triple-digit return. And so a lot of getting a return from a basket of stocks or portfolio of stocks is having a good portfolio. And so it's very important to do that. I wish I had spent more time earlier on the portfolio and less on the stocks. And what was the third thing you asked me? I can't remember.
What's your favorite phrase when you're having a bad day?
Oh, when having a bad day, my favorite phrase is keep calm and carry on. But also, going along with that, I always have this in the back of my mind, which is when one door closes, another one immediately opens. So there's always an opportunity, especially when things are changing. So you have to stay focused on what's happening and not on what's bothering you or what's making you scared. You just have to stay in the moment.
Classic wisdom from Ken Kornbluh. Sasha, give me 3 things. What's your what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now? Your favorite phrase and favorite snack?
Well, I wish I knew how good whole food plant-based foods are for inflammation in the body and the soreness. There would have been a lot less pain over the years, the whole food versions. And then as far as food goes, hummus, if you take a red pepper and you cut it and you can dip it in the hummus, it's delicious. And a phrase would be, on a bad day, would be, the good life is a direction and not a destination.
Oh, I like that. I have a similar one about climbing the mountain. It's the hike, not the pinnacle or something. But yeah, I love that. I love that you say that. And whole food plant-based, like it's fiber, people. It's not protein, it's fiber, people. Okay. Chris, what did you wish you knew 10 years ago? Favorite phrase when you're having a bad day, and your go-to snack?
10 years ago, similar from an investment perspective, sometimes when you're right in the middle of it, you don't really see the slow train kind of pulling out of the gate, and then it speeds up and you're still on the train. And I think from an investment perspective, it is learning to be earlier and earlier adopter of new ideas and innovations. Believe it or not, I spend a lot of time in innovation because it fascinates me. But generally speaking, I'm a slow adopter of the iPhone, of technology in general. So I really have to force myself to be present and aware of the surroundings, and I try to pay attention to it. The phrase, sadly, I come from a trading desk, so I'm learning to mature at age 57 to be much more present and not so boisterous, if you will, when I'm having a bad day. So I really try every day to practice breathing and staying present and just say, this too shall pass. Like, it's not that bad. You're going to get through it. Just keep going. My favorite snack is also nuts. It's just kind of a mixture of everything. And you just grab a handful and it just kind of, like a little squirrel, I just kind of eat a little bit all day. And so that tends to get me through the day.
I love the inner guru of Chris Buck. Just be present. Wow. I am learning new things about Chris Buck every day. I will say that I wish I knew 10 years ago the power of my own voice. Some of you might know that as a kid, I didn't want to eat meat. I couldn't do it, just couldn't stomach it. But my folks really said, you have to. Fast forward, I'm in my 20s. I'm still thinking I have to do this. But now we all know about factory farms. Like, we're not kids anymore. We know. So is that what adults do? They do that which they know is wrong and they do it anyway. So I was really struggling with like, oh gosh, why do I have to do this? And then my nephew, decades go by, I'm way into my 40s. My nephew, who's an athlete at the University of Oregon, comes back, his first semester back at home for Thanksgiving. He stands up at the table and he says, Coach said, if I'm going to play for the team, no meat, no dairy. And I was so mad that my whole life I knew, and I got thwarted, and I thought since then I haven't shut up. I really still using my voice every day, still mad about it. And I finally got that permission from the University of Oregon coach to go forth without meat or dairy. My favorite phrase, nose to the grindstone, eyes to the sky. And I love to eat. So basically everything that's plant-based is my favorite snack, but I will say peanut butter and apples are my favorite snack. I want to thank you all for all that you do, for caring about this subject, for seeing the secular trend, believing in it, for helping us bring to life VegTech and our VegTech plant-based innovation and climate ETF, so that we can, bring more opportunity to people who are also interested in this, what we believe to be a secular trend, and for just believing in change and for wanting to be a part of change. So I'm so grateful to all three of you. I want to say, all three of you, stay put, don't go anywhere. Everybody on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, thanks for being with me. Happy New Year, everybody. I will see you next Tuesday, as always, on the Plant-Based Business Hour. Stay put, you guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.